we saw these yesterday at practice, and now we kind of have an idea of what the Canucks are going to line up with in not only their final game, but also what you'd assume their opening night lineup would look like. Maybe the extra with Baines is a little different here because you'd assume Pia Suter is back by that time. He was listed as day-to-day by Rick Tocchet. So Aatu Ratu between Höglander and Garland is kind of the big one. Like, to me, Aatu Ratu's made this team. I've said it for a while now, that I thought Ratu deserves to be on this team. Looks like he's going to center that third line with Nils Amon and Teddy Bluger both going down to the fourth line with Kiefer Sherwood. So let's just get into each line here, because this segment idea started as kind of let's give our ideal Canucks lines, which we've done in the past, but I don't really disagree with anything that I'm seeing here. If this is who you have right now with Suter not being healthy, and obviously Joshua not being healthy either, I like this lineup for the Canucks. I like what they have on defense, and I like what they have up front.
Yeah, I like these combos. I think it's the best construction that Tocchet could have come up with. And I think it's a lot more interesting rather than debate, could they have slotted this guy in this slot instead, to really break down, okay, what are the variables that we're going to be looking at as far as whether this line is actually going to be successful or not. And this is where, for example, if we start with the JT Miller line, the key difference there is Danton Heinen moving up. I'm really intrigued to see what he can do. First of all, just in person watching him starting at training camp, I didn't realize how much of a strength his wingspan is and how that could help him win pucks back on the forecheck, on the back check. I spoke about how he was just eating everybody's lunch in those 2-on-2 battle drills. I think quietly he could help that line control play down low. And I think he's also learned how to mesh better with high skill line mates. I had a conversation with him about the art of meshing with elite players. And he's learned a lot compared to his early days when he first would occasionally get bumps up the lineup. He's learned what it takes from a hockey sense perspective, decisiveness in terms of how how quickly you're making plays, the hockey IQ side of it. The other thing that I think flies a little bit under the radar is, so Heinen, of course, doesn't have big point totals on the surface, but that's largely because he doesn't really play power play at all. He's actually scored 5-on-5 points at a legit top 6 rate relative to his ice time over the last three seasons. Like, over the last 3 seasons, what would you guess the difference is between Brock Besser and Danton Heinen at 5-on-5 points?
I don't know, like 10 off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's 11. Like, Heinen has 85-on-5 points in 215 games, and Besser has 91 in 226 games. So Besser's actually played 11 extra games there. And the difference isn't that large. So that goes to show you, I think Heinen can have more offensive pop than what Pia Suter showed there. And yet I also like the fact that if Ratu's able to stick at center, now you've got Suter as a plan B option, where if for whatever reason Heinen doesn't work on that top line, that's a hell of a plan B option to have, because Pia Suter isn't a sexy option on paper. He's not a dynamic, flashy player. He's not ever really going to land on highlight reels, but that trio of Suter, Miller, and Besser, I was looking at the numbers, spent nearly 205 minutes together in the regular season. They controlled 66% of 5-on-5 scoring chances and outscored teams 16-4 at 5-on-5. Like, that's,
and a lot of those minutes were down the stretch too, like when the rest of the team was struggling. So that trio was really good down the stretch, and hell, even in the playoffs.
In the background?
Do we lose
lost Arm? Oh, and then we're back. Yeah, I've noticed we have a few technical issues here in the back end. I'll look into it, but I think you guys should be good now.
Sorry,
I just heard random music playing in the background, and I was like, is this my laptop playing it, or is this a technical difficulty? But the point being is the Canucks are well positioned. If you've got a trio that performed that well, as a fallback option if Heinen doesn't work.
And again, when we talk about, if Heinen doesn't work, we also have to assume, okay, when Dakota Joshua comes back, he's going to have a spot in this lineup, you would assume, and that presumably would bump Nils Höglander off that Connor Garland line. And I know Höglander and Garland have been phenomenal together in the preseason, but again, Joshua and Garland together, they're like peanut butter and jelly. They're going to be together. So if Aatu Ratu sticks in that spot, now all of a sudden you've got another top 6 option in Niels Höglander. So I think that's very interesting to think about going forward.
For sure. And then with the second line, I think first, the most exciting possibility for me with that line combination is what can they cook off the rush? Because you've got Sprong's high-end finishing ability, which also I went back and watched the video of goals that he scored in Seattle, in Detroit. A large majority of those are off the rush. He's quick when it comes to, let's say the other team has possession in the offensive zone. His team regains possession of the puck. He's really quick at getting up the ice, being the first man to lead the rush. And when he's got time and space in transition, and we of course saw it in preseason when he torched the Flames as well, that's where he's really able to use his hands. He's able to use his shot. He's able to use his creativity to do a lot of damage. So when you combine that with also Jake DeBrusk's speed and his above average finishing ability as well, I think they could be really dangerous off the rush, which is one of the areas that the Canucks really want to improve on. I think the question for me, as far as can that line actually work, is are they going to be ferocious enough on the forecheck with Daniel Sprong as far as his play away from the puck? DeBrusk will help as far as adding speed, but I think a lot of times last season, I imagine part of the frustration that Rick Tocchet had with the Elias Pettersson line was they weren't often engaged enough on the forecheck. They weren't creating enough havoc, forcing the types of turnovers that can lead to quick strike offense. And I think that's what Sprong is going to have to do as far as his end of the bargain to make sure that line works, because it's why Andre Kuzmenko ultimately didn't click, and why that line had moments where at 5-on-5 they waned a little bit.
Okay, let's pull up the rest of this lineup, Jacob. I just want to take a quick look here. And again, you bring up that DeBrusk, Pettersson, Sprong line. The top six looks pretty good. And the bottom six, I'd say this is the best bottom six the Canucks have had, I'd say, in years. It's definitely better than what they started last year with. Harm's going to quickly rejoin for those watching the YouTube live show. But look, you look at this lineup, and it just comes down to the fact that it's better all around. And I know it looks like they took a step back on defense, and Jim Rutherford had the quote ahead of training camp that, yeah, our team is probably better, or excuse me, our team is probably as good as it was at this time last year, if not better. And the big difference is that they made trades in season, right? So you had the playoff run, and obviously you had Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov added to this team. I don't see the need for adding someone like an Elias Lindholm this year. When I look at this lineup, it just looks like, yeah, okay, you go make a Nikita Zadorov-like acquisition, or you go get that top four defenseman. Like, I'd say this team's probably a top four defenseman, whether left-handed or right-handed, away from being a truly great contending team.
Yeah, I still think that the Canucks would probably like to add a centerman, especially a right shot one, if they can, just because of what it allowed them to do from a matchup perspective in the playoffs, right? Because that's where they were able to go out and play Lindholm against the Draisaitl line, and then all of a sudden, in theory, it frees up Pettersson in the Nashville series. He was playing against the Colton Sissons line. In the Edmonton series, you saw a lot of Ryan McLeod, and the Canucks didn't actually get to capitalize on that because Pettersson struggled. But if you are able to find a right shot matchup center, that it doesn't have to be a Lindholm caliber player, because you're just going to end up paying too much, and I think a defenseman should be the top priority. But if you can find a guy that is going to be right-handed, really good on face-offs, help you on the PK, and can hold up well enough from a matchup perspective where you can use that Garland-Joshua line to play tough defensive minutes, then you're freeing up Pettersson. And I think that idea would still be really attractive to Rick Tocchet and this management group.
And Keaton Chef brought it up in the chat. We talk about how great this forward group is right now. You still don't even have Joshua and Suter, and it's only going to get better. So this is what we're looking at right now as we head into the final game of the preseason on Friday against the Oilers and into the season. Harm, let's talk about this bottom six. Let's talk about the Höglander, Ratu, Garland line. That line's been together since training camp. They are officially the line that has been together the longest from the start of training camp. We saw Denton Heinen, JT Miller, and Brock Besser together, but then that got split up, and obviously we haven't seen them in any preseason games, but we've seen a healthy dose of Niels Höglander, Ratu, and Connor Garland, and that trio, the results have been promising.
They have been. Now the challenge for Ratu is translating that preseason success to regular season, because preseason to me is not real NHL caliber hockey. There are countless examples of talented young prospects or players that dominated preseason and then couldn't quite make it work when the games actually counted. For example, I think about Marco Rossi. There was a year, I think, where he led the NHL in preseason scoring, and then he couldn't produce at all offensively when the games actually counted, and it took him that extra year of development before he finally broke out as a rookie last season with the Minnesota Wild. Matt Coronado was a player that had a really good preseason for the Flames last year. There were high expectations that, okay, could he slot in and be a full-time top-line player for them? And it didn't quite work. So for Ratu, it's, okay, you had a great preseason. How does that look now that all the top players on every team are in the lineup, and now that they're actually operating at full speed? Because let's be honest, players like Pedersen, Hughes, Miller, when we see them Friday, they're usually just going through the motions when it comes to preseason. It's more just finding your legs, finding your feet. The intensity ramps up significantly when the games actually start. So that's going to be the number one thing that you look for. And the other aspect that I'm going to be interested to track with this line is what types of minutes and matchups are they actually going to be trusted with? Because it's not just that Ratu's inexperienced in the NHL, but Höglander, as we know, can be up and down as far as how much defensive trust Rick Tocchet has in him. So could there be a scenario where that line gets sheltered a little bit and is used as kind of like an offensive sheltered bottom six line, especially because if Suter comes back and all of a sudden Suter's in that Oman spot and it's a Suter, Bluger, Sherwood as your fourth line, well, that's better than most NHL fourth lines. And I could see a scenario where, given how much Tocchet loves Bluger, loves Suter, and that Sherwood's a really good fourth liner too, it could end up being more of a relatively even load as far as the bottom six lines, the minutes and matchups that they get, rather than a distinguished, oh, this Ratu line is the third line and this Bluger line is the fourth line. I don't mind the idea of that, but the thing that you'd have to be careful of there is Connor Garland is one of your team's best 5-on-5 play drivers. You want to use him as much as possible at even strength, and I think there's some risk of, if you run into a scenario where you don't fully trust Höglander and Ratu from a defensive standpoint, start sheltering them, that you're maybe not maximizing the impact that Garland could have. So those are some of the details that I'm going to be looking at from a tactical and deployment standpoint.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because to me, that's the biggest thing I'm thinking about when it comes to where's Dakota Joshua going to play when he gets back. If Dakota Joshua's playing with Connor Garland, it means that Connor Garland is probably going to get more ice time. And that's a good thing at 5-on-5 for this team. So it's something that I've been starting to consider, as well as what this team looks like when Dakota Joshua comes back. Anything else that you wanted to say about the line combos before we move on?
Yeah, I also think with that Garland line, they've found some success with it early on, but Garland is an unconventional player with how he attacks, right? We know that he's really slippery down low. He does his cutbacks. He's kind of crafty in how he tries to manufacture space. And I imagine he's the type of player that isn't you're not instantly going to build chemistry with. It can take time to learn and understand his tendencies as a player, because he just attacks in unpredictable angles and patterns. So with that in mind, Garland, one of his biggest strengths is when he's down low in the offensive zone, he's always looking for that pass into the slot where he's the one that has the puck. He's attracting attention down low, and the defenders are turned around and looking towards him, which can mean that they're not able to have their eyes on the inner slot area. And what Joshua does so well, and why they have so much good chemistry, is Joshua just finds those open pockets in and around the net. So for me, it's who on that line, as far as Ratu and Höglander, can find those open pockets that Garland can feed them, and then they can feast offensively that way.
Thanks for watching this video. For more great content from Canucks Army, check out Sakaris and Price, Rink-Wide Vancouver, or our show, Canucks Conversation. We're your one-stop shop for interviews, breaking news, and a live Canucks postgame show hosted by Jeff Patterson.